What do you think? Okay.
Let's do it.
Okay. Hi, welcome everybody. It's nice to have like a little intimate group. I'm sure some other people will pop in 30 minutes into the into the conversation. Um, welcome. See? Hi, Tim. Welcome. We're just starting. So my name is Kristen Kennedy. I am one of the artistic directors at PICA, along with Erin Boberg-Doughton. I'm the curator of visual art. I'm also an artist, and this is Elio.
Hello, I'm Elio. I'm the programs manager here at PICA. I'm also an artist. I'm a photographer. I write poetry. So it's nice to be amongst other artists here today.
So this is going to be really simple, and we're going to go through slide by slide. Some of you may have already been through this process before, applied before, but I'm really grateful you're here to listen again, because we have found that people who attend the info session are more likely to make it through to the final round at the panel. There's just some like subtleties in what we're talking about that they're really paying attention to. So thanks for being here. Even if you think you've heard it before, I think it will be good to have a refresher. As Elio said, there'll be a recording of this session online for you to look at again. If you forget anything, if you have questions, you can email us. Um, and I'll say that in the chat, if you have questions, whatever they are, if you have them right now, if you have them while I'm talking, you can post them there. And I'll try to pay attention as I go through and answer them. Or we'll save it to the end because there's like a bigger theme to discuss or something. Um, Anybody have anything they want to say right off the bat? No pressure to, but anything burning? Okay. Why don't we begin, Elio? Okay. Welcome to the Precipice Fund round 14. We've been doing this for 14 years. Exciting. Next slide. About the Precipice Fund. Okay, so it was established in 2013. Our lead funder is the Andy Warhol Foundation for the Visual Arts. We are the administrator, so they pass through the money to us, and we give out grants from between $500 to $5,000 each. Most of the grants are in the thousands. There's very few grants that are $500. But we keep that scale there because we have seen a few projects that have come through in the smaller amounts that have made it through that are doing something really modest. And we want the grants to be scalable to need so that we can fund as many as we can. The focus is on unincorporated, collaborative visual art in the Portland, Oregon area. You could see that visual art is also in the lead funder's name. So that is where the focus comes from. And we'll talk about what that means to us as we move forward. Okay, let's keep going. Recognizing the barriers to funding faced by many independent artist projects and collectives, the intention of the Precipice Fund is to support unincorporated, collaborative visual art in Portland, Oregon area and adjacent suburbs, particularly projects that serve to support other local artists and enrich the region's broader art ecology. We encourage applications from first-time grant writers, artists from underrepresented communities, and artists and projects that reflect the region's diversity of cultures, identities, aesthetics, and contemporary creative practices. What do we mean by unincorporated? Your project cannot be a federally registered 501c3 nonprofit, because if it were, you would be eligible to apply for Warhol funding independently and other funding. This is specifically like gap funding for projects that exist in between institutions and solo artist practice. So they're like collaborative efforts that are put on with a public-facing element. And you can't be commercial or a for-profit business or LLC. There are some exceptions to that, so just hold on a second. Exceptions are rare but noteworthy. Sometimes there are organizations that are registered at the Oregon state level, but not at the federal level. Those projects are eligible. LLCs are eligible if the primary purpose is a not-for-profit enterprise. Example, an independent artist-run space with an LLC for insurance liability. So we found that many people have to get that designation in order to get insurance to rent a studio business for artists or to run a specific element of their practice. And so that's what we're talking about there. A proposal might be eligible if it's partnering with a community or social service organization, or if it's strictly renting space from a nonprofit art organization, but the project cannot be part of such organization's own programming, nor be promoted as such. So this is where I think there is a little bit of confusion, but I'll give an example. No projects that we fund through the Precipice Fund can be presented by PICA because we are funded by the Warhol Foundation already. And they would see that as us kind of collecting independently funded grant projects from artists and double dipping in their money to fund it twice. Now, do I think that all the projects need double the money? Yes, they probably need quadruple the money, but this is a very standard designation of a foundation. Oregon Contemporary is also funded by the Warhol Foundation. So if Oregon Contemporary's entire program was made up of Precipice projects, that would be the Warhol Foundation not only funding them to do their programming, but then all of the artists bringing more funding to the organization. So but Oregon Contemporary has these little side spaces. They have their side gallery. They sometimes like lend out to artists to do projects. And if it's an independent project happening there that they're not advertising as part of their like season of projects, sometimes there's an exception. So if you're confused about that, if you're wanting to work with an arts nonprofit on this project, please reach out to Ellie or I and we can help explain. But I think that the primary purpose of the grant has always been to seed artistic activity outside of institutions. And those are the projects that are the most competitive when they get in front of the panel. Okay, next slide. I'm going to go through a couple of projects that are each examples of some of these things that we're describing. So this is a project that was called Transformative Justice, Films for the Future by Sensory Organizing Project. There's the list of the artists there. Next slide. And here's a description. Sensory Organizing Project is a fledgling radical queer video art collective using experimental documentary filmmaking to amplify political organizing work around Portland. We provide low to no cost, non-commercial video documentation for activists, supporting our communities in authoring their own media narratives. We also pursue longer form creative projects, including our current film series, Transformative Justice, which interviews suppressed narratives from Portland's communities most affected by systemic oppression, collaboratively imagining a future beyond the prison industrial complex. Okay, next slide. What do we mean by collaborative? To be eligible for a project, this cannot be a solo artist project. It can't be for the sole purpose of promoting your own creative practice. There are RAC project grants for that. There are other grants in the region for that. Oregon Arts Commission has grants for that, but this is for a collaborative project. So it must involve at least 2 artists in its organization, production, and presentation. The primary contact serves strictly as communication point person during the application and grant funding process. At least 1 collaborating artist must also be listed with a maximum of 5 collaborators or 6 total artists, including the collaborators and primary contact. So Catherine, I see your question. I'll answer it in 1 second after I talk about the collaborator. Thank you for asking it. So what do we mean by primary contact? That's the person who answers their email the fastest in your collective. but they're not seen in the final project as having like a more primary artistic role. So as you're divvying up roles and responsibilities amongst your collective or collaboration, be thinking about who would handle being the primary contact. That's who Elio is going to call when you get the grant. That's going to be who we follow up with contracts with. And we'll talk about what is the difference between like a collaborator and somebody who's just involved in your project. But a collaborating artist would have like primary responsibilities within the project. They're organizing with you, they're presenting it. That's different. Let's say that you're running an artist space that's a gallery, and your collaborative is running that space, and then you have a list of artists that are showing there. The list of artists that are showing there would not be collaborators. They're artists you're inviting in, you're giving them a little fee, you're hanging their artwork, but they didn't have organizing. They weren't part of the organizing structure of the project. So that's how you distinguish who a collaborator is versus somebody you're inviting into your project. Okay, so I see two questions. The first is from Catherine. Does that mean that if the project we are working on could not be presented in Oregon Contemporary's biennial or in Building 5's residency program? Okay, so I need a little more clarification, Catherine. Does this mean that if you do a project and then the curators from the Oregon Biennial are like, we love this project, we want to include it or a part of it in our biennial, that's fine. But if you get invited to the biennial and you propose a project and you're looking for funding for that project from the Precipice Fund, that is not fine. Does that distinction make sense?
It does make sense hypothetically, but the biennial, we've already applied for the biennial. So now but haven't heard if we're in yet. So now I'm confused if I shouldn't even apply to Precipice.
Well, okay. I would say that, like, let's talk about the subversion in the Precipice Fund project. Is there an aspect of your project that you could apply for that won't necessarily be exactly the same as what you've applied for the Oregon Biennial with? Like, is there a part of your project that's happening in the public realm or like a section of it that's happening in November and not when the biennial is happening?
Yes, actually, that is true because anyway, we're aiming to kind of have two. Well, also, we might not be in the biennial. So there's this kind of plan B, which has been this is related to voting. And so the goal is to get it up before the midterm elections. And so that would be like October. So maybe plan A and plan B can exist together and not be optional, like not either or, but more of a and.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
So I would say to think about the project that you proposed for the Oregon Biennial and think about an aspect of it, like specifically that you could apply to Precipice from. I would also not mention that you applied to the Oregon Biennial. It doesn't matter, it's like you haven't signed the contract yet or anything at the time of it. I think that likely if you were to get in the Oregon Biennial, there would be some funding coming to you from then. So Precipice wouldn't be the primary funder. There's a lot of reasons I think you should just apply.
Okay.
That is a tricky one, A lot of times, normally what would happen is a Precipice Fund grantee would do a project, they'd be funded by Precipice, and then a curator or organization would be like, we love that, could you do that here? And that's a separate thing, right? Then you're doing it a second instance, and they're helping produce it, right? But this is a little bit tricky. In terms of the Building 5's residency program, I don't think that's a problem because that feels like it would be developmental support to help the project.
It's really, I mean, there's no money at all. It's just a place to put the installation. So that I could talk about. I mean, that's
you could say that you have like a projected partnership that they're letting you have free space.
Yeah.
Okay, do the collaborators need to reside in Oregon? We will get to that, but I will answer it now. One of the primary contact has to have an Oregon, a Portland address. You can have collaborators anywhere in the world. And the primary activity has to happen in Portland, but your collaborators can be from anywhere. I hope that answers the question. Can the primary yes, the primary contact is considered one of the collaborating artists. Yes. Okay, let's keep going. Here's another project that was collaborative. It was happening in an alternative site. And this is an example of something that was like a weekend event. It didn't go on for a year. It didn't reside in a space. It wasn't presenting multiple things. It was sort of an event that was supported. So the group is called First Brick. It was an all-queer curatorial practice and collaboration that works to create non-dogmatic spaces that are constantly in flux in location or practice. We pair with emerging and seasoned artists with an emphasis on contemporary practice and work that provokes critical dynamic discussion. They put on a festival in a backyard. It had installation aspects. There were readings, there were performances, there was food. It was free. And that was the event that was supported by the Precipice Fund. Okay, what do we mean by visual art? Projects must be rooted in or strongly related to visual art. We have an expansive definition of what that means. I don't know why this is still a question, but sound art is eligible. It's in the canon, it's collected in museums, it's presented in spaces. I think there is a distinction between sound art and like a rock and roll concert. Those are like two different things. Sound art comes from like a visual art history in through performance, and music comes from like a fine performing arts tradition. Film and video are eligible. Experimental film festivals and micro cinemas have been successfully funded. But proposals to produce a film or video are only eligible in their creation phase, not post-production and or distribution, and should reflect a visual art informed practice rather than a feature or independent film industry type setting. So their film has a very unique funding structure where filmmakers are doing pre-production, production, and post-production. And when you're making feature-length films, we've gotten proposals from people who have already done all the front end and they're looking for support for editing or distribution. And that's very common in filmmaking funding, but we are not that type of grant. What we fund is like an experimental film festival or like Church of Film series that they did, or you saw that series of people who are making documentaries with activists. Like that is kind of a project that can happen, but not post-production or distribution money for a feature-length film that has more of like a dialogical narrative film industry feeling. It just won't be competitive against the other projects. Performance art that clearly demonstrates a visual art lineage connection is eligible. Other forms, dance, theater, music, writing, etc., are only eligible if applicants clearly demonstrate that visual art is a core component as material, content, and or discourse. The jury will have visual art backgrounds. So we had a number of proposals last year from theater companies. I respect the work that's happening in the theater companies. I know that they are using visual elements in their sets, sometimes media-based work. They're collaborating with visual artists. But the primary form of that work usually is like ensemble theater work, happening in a theater space for an audience. And when it is in the context of this grant, where we can fund, 12 proposals, it usually does not get funded unless there's a strong kind of alternative approach to what they're doing. Last year, a playwright series did get funded that happened at Barbie's village. And that was because the kind of people that were involved were multimedia artists. They were workshopping scripts. There was like a strong community element. It wasn't about like presenting a full play. There were visual artists involved, and it was strongly received by the panel. I'm not saying it's impossible to get through with a theatrical performance with a company, but I haven't seen it happen yet. Next slide. Here's an example of some performing artists, some performance artists who applied and got the grant, and they've gotten it several times. Physical Education is a collective with Keon Gaskin, Ali Hankins, Takahiro Yamamoto, and Lou Yim. The project that they did was a series of workshops for visual artists to teach them about embodiment. There was like a critical reading series, there were workshops, and then they also applied several years for a festival that they do that includes a lot of video work, installation, and other projects. And their work, even though it comes out of, I would say, dance mostly, they all have strong visual art backgrounds and make objects and speak to it using kind of a visual art trajectory background. So here's an example of how performance art fits into visual art language. Portland-based Physical Education is comprised of dance and performance artists. PE's vision is to offer performance audiences, artists of all mediums, and curious individuals immersive methods of engaging with dance and performance. And it goes on. Next slide. What's a project? This concept is broad. If it meets the core eligibility criteria, a project might take the form of, and this is like a very short list of some things that have been funded. Curated exhibitions, programs, or a series of events. That's the most, on the nose. It can be a one-off artistic project. It can be a publication. It can be a festival. It can be a website or online project. It can be a residency program. It could be workshops or other learning opportunities by or for artists. It can be operations support or ongoing programming support of an independent, unincorporated artist-run space. There's many, many other possibilities. Like somebody once did a project where they installed all of these like telephones around town, and the telephones were like sculptural, but they also, you could pick them up and then there would be these recordings on them, right? That sort of doesn't fit into any of these things, but it was a project in public space run by a collective, and it was funded. So there's anomalies that are funded, there's other ideas, but these are the list of things that are considered projects. I'd also would like to turn you to our website. Every single round of Precipice Fund, there's a link to the projects that were funded and a short description of them. And so if you're looking to kind of understand the kinds of projects that have been funded, that's a great place to start. And if you go to the Warhol Foundation site, they have a link under their Regranting program to every single regranting organization in the United States. And those regranting organizations will also list projects that were funded there. And we have an interconnected network, right? So if you're looking for ideas or language, that's a great place to go and learn from other artists and other project proposals. Next slide. This is another project that was funded. To give you an example, the Monday Salon at Living School of Art. Here's a list of artists. Next slide. The Living School of Art was a project that ran from 2016 to 2021, and it was an intergenerational neighbor-led social practice artwork located within a pre-existing 120-unit affordable housing apartment complex in East Portland. The project drew inspiration from the concept of a living school, which was described by author Bell Hooks as a space for teaching and learning occurring simultaneously at all moments of the community's life together. So Living School of Art, the artists and the collaborators all lived in this one apartment building. They represented a lot of different cultural backgrounds. They grew a garden, they made food, they made ceramics together, they made art shows, they used the laundry room as their exhibition and residency space. They had youth programming. It was like a really diverse kind of like open network school. It happened in an alternative space. This is an example of a project that's happening in the public realm for artists and the community outside of an institutional structure. Right. But Catherine, if the biennial curators were like, we love the Living School of Art, will you do a project inside of the biennial? They would be still eligible for the project, if that makes sense. Okay, let's keep going. I'll say, Gazelle, this goes back to your question about primary contact and collaborators in a little more detail. One project collaborator must apply as the primary contact. They serve as the main communications point person during the application and granting process. They are not a project's lead artist. The primary contact and collaborators are considered equally as artists, applicants, and grantees. The primary contact must reside in Portland and/or an adjacent Oregon suburb. They can't be a Washington state resident or any other state's resident. Collaborators can be based anywhere. In addition to the primary contact, applicant list all other collaborators in the application. Collaborators share organizing or coordinating responsibility for the project. Artists supported by the project but do not have organizing responsibility are not collaborators. For example, an artist in an exhibition who is not involved in the project's planning or implementation. An individual may only submit one application as the primary contact per grant cycle, but serve as a collaborator or a participant on any number of applications. Portland is very small. So we have seen that somebody who's leading like Martha, you're applying, you're the lead applicant on an application, but somebody who's running an artist run space has also asked you to sign on to exhibit at that artist run space, and they're also applying for a Precipice grant. That's fine. So you can be listed on multiple applications, but you can only be listed as the primary applicant on one. Last year, we had some people who were trying to like hack the system, and they basically put in versions of the same proposal and listed each of them as different primary applicants in the collaborative. It didn't make any sense. It wasn't stronger for that. They didn't have more chances. It's not the lottery. So the applicants read every application carefully. They're looking at the names of the people and their backgrounds and what they're doing. The primary Gazelle, the primary contact, there is no lead artist because it's not, this isn't a project that represents one artist's practice. So this is a project presented by a collaborative of artists, and the primary contact is just the person who's going to help, who Elio can email the fastest. And we can ask quick questions too. Right. Thank you. Those who are currently enrolled in a degree seeking program are eligible to apply. Applicants must be over 18 years of age. Okay, what does Portland mean? The Warhol Foundation wants us to have like a specific focus in a region because part of this is about shoring the sides up of a community and supporting the artistic practice that happens without funding, that exists in between like an artist studio and the institutions, right? And so they're really interested in us focusing in one area. Before the pandemic, we had spread out a little bit to Astoria and Eugene because we were paying attention to where artists were living and working, and we wanted to form some connections there and support, and that was wonderful. Only a few projects would get supported from those regions, but it was really impactful. When the pandemic happened, the Precipice Fund turned into like an artist support fund and not a grant. It was just subsidy. And as we're kind of eking back into project support, we're really focusing on Portland only, and we might expand out, you know, back to Astoria and other other places as we move on. But there's just a lot of need right here, and we're trying to concentrate the growth and health of Portland. With that said, if somebody's presenting a project in Beaverton or Hillsdale or, you know, other places that are like close in, that's still eligible. We don't have like a geographic boundary where we're like Portland ends here. It's kind of a know it when we see it type of thing. So we haven't had many people applying from Medford or other places. We wish we could fund everybody, but we're really focusing on this sort of like the broader Portland area. And again, collaborators can be based anywhere, but the activity that you're generating should really be focused in Portland. Okay, next slide. Demographic information or cultural context. So in the application, you'll see that we ask for demographic information, but that is optional. Some people, you know, don't want to give it, right? They don't like the system where you have to identify in that way, and that's totally fine. But I want to explain why we ask for it. If you choose to share this, here's how it helps in your project. First of all, the only place that the demographic information is shared with is the Warhol Foundation. If your project names working with or centers work around a particular cultural group or subjectivity, it helps the panel understand what your lived or learned proximity to this culture is, and it helps understand what your relationship to your partners might be. So, for example, we have had projects that have presented that they're going to do a series of things out in nature about waterways. And in the grant, they mention that they're going to collaborate with NEA, which is like an indigenous organization, and they're going to tap into their educational programming and work with the kids there. But all of the applicants of the project are white, and they don't have any relationship with NEA, nor like a long-standing kind of a relationship with indigenous communities. And so that feels extractive to the panel. Now, if your project collaborative includes people from different cultures, and then you're doing cultural work, it helps the panel to understand what your relationship is. If you're an all-white collective that's doing work with an indigenous community, then speak about your relationship with that indigenous community. Like, oh, I've been working embedded with this community for 6 years. Here's the people that I consider my partners. We have a strong relationship. I've spoken to them about this project. They're invested in it, or they're a collaborator. That is how you would kind of describe and elucidate your cultural literacy. But I would say that, like, don't use a project to like investigate or support a culture that you do not have a relationship with or you are not a part of yourself. Next slide. Okay, this slide is really important. There are people here on this. You're all great artists. You know what your work is about. You're passionate about it. But sometimes when you go to write the application, all those things go out the window and you forget to describe who you are or what you're actually doing. And it's hard to do in that word count. So here's a list of questions that can really help. You have to know that there are going to be panelists that are from the local community. They might know you or understand the context of your work, but there are panelists from outside of the community. So you really think about writing the project as if somebody doesn't know you and you're passionately describing why you're doing the project. So what's the essence of your project? Really think about that and write it succinctly. What's the drive behind the project? Describe how it's collaborative. It's not enough to be like, here's the 6 people working on it. Talk about what you're doing together. Details. Who are the artists? What's the timeline? Elucidate your thinking. I'll give an example that we had someone apply who had been doing in a collaborative that had been doing many projects in town. They were all excellent. They applied to do a podcast series. They're like, we're going to do a podcast series with a group of artists. They never mentioned who the artists were that they were going to interview. They didn't talk about why those artists might be interested. So the panel had no idea how to understand what the content of the podcast was. And they didn't know that prior work. So the applicant took for granted that we were going to fill in all those details. And what would have been helpful, even if they didn't have the full list, they could have said, here's the type of artist we're interested in talking to, and here's why. Here's an example of 2 names, and here's what they do, and here's the kinds of things we're going to talk about with them. That's what I mean about details and elucidating your thinking for the panel. Make a distinction between it's hopeful, planned, projected, or confirmed. So this also leads to like who's going to be presenting the project, where it's going to be, who are the artists listed in it. Be like, we hope to have the project in an empty pool. We don't have one confirmed yet, but that's where we hope to have it. Or we plan to have the project in an empty pool. Here's the name of the pool. Here's the name of the person we're getting it from. It's already secured. We hope to have a project in an empty pool. It's projected that we'll do it at this space. We're still working out the details, right? Like any of those designations are fine for the panel. It's not more successful to have your location confirmed than for it to be hopeful, but the panel wants to understand your thinking about the space and the distinction between what's happening in your project. Also describe how your project is rooted in visual art practice. Ask yourself, is your budget ethical and is your project properly scaled? So what does it mean for a budget to be ethical? The example that I'll give is we had somebody apply for a project that was sort of at a certain moment in Portland's history where there was a housing crisis due to foreclosure. And so they wanted to work with a family that was going through foreclosure and do projection mapping on the outside of their house and tell their story and kind of visualize it. Nowhere in the budget was any honorarium for the family they were working with. So you could see there the ethical dilemma. I think it just was like a slight oversight, but they want to talk about a financial crisis a family is going through, and then they're paying everybody involved, the filmmaker, themselves, everything. And there was no designation for a small honorarium for the family or describing what the relationship was there budgetarily. So like, look at your budget. And if you're doing a more social justice or social practice oriented project, think about how you're organizing the money. That also applies to how you're paying yourself, which you should do. You don't get any special points in this grant for not paying yourself. If you're somehow independently wealthy, you can describe that and say, I don't need the money. I'm putting it towards my other collaborators and other things. Great. If you have other sources of support that are paying the artist fees and you need Precipice just for something else in the project, explain that. There is space in the budget to write kind of narrative notes, and that's very helpful for the panel. The other thing is your project properly scaled? This is a small grant. Maybe when we started 14 years ago, getting $5,000 seemed like you were getting $1 million. I don't think so, but it seemed like it was a lot of money, especially when you've never had any money to present your project, right? But your project doesn't have to do all things for all people. For a $5,000 project, if you really pay the artist you're working with, pay yourselves, buy some supplies, buy some hospitality for the opening, take out an ad, build a website, it's going to go fast. So really look at the scale of your project, and you don't have to promise that you're doing an exhibition, making a book and a performance, and then doing a workshop. You don't have to turn yourself into a giant organization overnight. Do what you do best, scale it to what the budget is that you're asking for. Don't ask for 5,000 if you only need 2, because then you're taking $3,000 away from another artist project, right? So think about what your project really needs. Okay, next slide. The application process. Elio, is this where you jump in? I can't remember. Yes, or I do this?
I jump in here now.
Okay, great. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Give you a rest.
I'm gonna get a glass of water, but I'll be here.
Okay. Okay, the application process, y'all. So we have some dates. Of course, the application is open now. It closes on Friday, October 3rd at 11:59 p.m. The online application system, you're going to apply through Submittable. Detailed instructions are provided throughout that website there, and the submission platform provides tech support via email. Who should complete the application? While any project collaborator may help answer questions and source required materials, the primary contact should be closely involved in the application process, as this is who will need to be in contact with grant staff, me, or Kristen regarding any content and materials. Application content, complete project description, and we also have like a word count that's included in the submittable application. So you're going to want to include your project title and a brief summary, concept and goals, possible site or venue. Again, this cannot be at PICA as it is a conflict of interest. You'll want to include a timeline, and also a few narrative responses explaining the project's public component, the audience that you intend to invite, and the type of support for local artists. And of course, include bios of all collaborators that are involved. You're also going to want to include some visual support material. We require uploaded images. You can upload up to 6 images in that section. It's optional to include video material as well. And in your application, you'll also want to include your budget form. This can be downloaded on our website, and I'll run through our website and a little bit of the application just so you have a nice feel of where things are located as well. Selection criteria. So projects must be submitted on time and meet minimum eligibility qualifications. This criteria includes, but is not limited to, artistic strength, so degree to which a project articulates and exemplifies innovative, expansive, and experimental practices that nurture new modes of thinking and making. Potential to generate support and opportunity for other Portland artists. Ability to foster rich dialogue with contemporary culture, concerns, and/or issues. It displays a commitment to artistic practice, demonstrates intentional engagement with the project topics and themes. Catherine, did you have?
Yeah, can I just ask a quick question? The project I'm working on with these collaborators, 1, 2, 3, 4, absolutely checks 4 of these criteria, but I don't really see that it has the potential to generate support and opportunity for other Portland artists. So does that mean we shouldn't apply?
No, I want to just interject and let me get my face back on here, be easier. So what support for other Portland artists means, it could be a workshop that you're doing for them. It could also be that they're just audience.
Okay.
So you said that the project involved like voting, you're a group of artists. I'm just going to assume raising awareness about voting through an artistic, event.
Yes.
And that does support other artists. Artists are voters, right? So
Okay.
it's okay. Another project that is like physical education, who's hosting workshops specifically for artists, that's a more direct support, artist to artist. But an exhibition also supports the artists who come and see it. It's to the broader artistic community. So we did have a project many years ago. I think Ariana Jacob was a part of it, Mac McFarlane, where they were doing some awareness around, I can't remember if it was a measure or just like general political awareness. And it was like, I'm going to get it wrong, but I literally think that they were like releasing confetti with sayings on it all over town, right? So it didn't have like a specific public event. It wasn't a workshop, but that was funded. It was like an action by a collective group of artists that like supported general awareness around it.
Okay.
Messages in the public realm type thing.
Okay.
Okay.
Kristen, really quick, there is a question about using the budget template. Can you speak to why the budget template that we provide is the one that is needed to be used in the application?
Yeah, so that really is so there's a standardization for the panelists. If they're reviewing like 60 grants and they can like look really clearly at each application and understand the main budget components of it, that's helpful for them. So I would say that like your extensive in-depth budget is great. For you guys, if you can condense it into the categories we have, you also have the opportunity to add categories. Isn't that right, Elio? There are some.
I think so. I think it's editable.
It's editable. You can change like a line item if you have a specific cost that's different than the ones we list. But it's basically an ease of like information for the panelists. There is a little section of notes. So if it's like, here's a rental line item, but what I really want you to understand is like $5 of this is going to this and 10 is going to this, or here's our arrangement with the landlord. You can write that in the narrative part.
Great, thank you. I'm going to continue on to selection criteria here and talk about feasibility. So again, we went over artistic strengths and the qualifications there. Feasibility is the capacity to carry out and complete the project within the grant period. So that is over the course of a year. And thinking about the available or anticipated resources that you're going to need during that time. Another criteria is public and community engagement. So the public's accessibility to the project's final output, commitment to serving the local region, and potential for impact on the local or regional arts ecology here in the Portland area. A review and selection process. So our review panel is made up of 3 to 4 external panelists. I'm sorry, an external panel, not of PICA staff, 3 to 4 local and national visual arts and arts workers. Again, PICA staff is not on the review panel. You will be notified of the panel's decision by mid to late November of this year. And then if you're interested in reapplying in the future, those who are awarded must wait 1 year round until they're able to apply for the next Precipice Fund. So if you apply this year and you're granted, you're not able to apply for 2026, but you would be able to apply for 2027. And now we're going to talk about money. Okay, again, so we award $500 to $5,000 for each project. Occasionally, applicants receive less than what they request. For example, a proposal requesting $5,000 might receive $4,000 based on the panel's perception of the project's needs. Again, the Precipice Fund is committed to the success of all grantees and will never award less than what is requested if reduced funding will hamper the health of that project. Distributions of funds. So again, announcements of grantees will happen in November, and the funds will be distributed in early January. We're going to talk about budget a bit here. So this may answer some questions that folks may have. So the budget form the budget form that we provide is the one that you must use for this application. Again, it's on our website. It is auto-calculated to do the math for you, so it helps with any errors. You can upload this as an Excel or PDF version. You can also upload it as a Google Sheet, and it is an editable form. So in this form, we want to see a few things. We want to see that you pay yourself. So even if it's just an honorarium, it's important to economize your practice and value your work. It shows that an artist's labor deserves compensation, and it helps you be conscious of the time that you put into the project. We want to see that you pay the artist that you invite. The selection panel will look for evidence of some level of compensation to the artist you involve in the project. In rare cases, this is not monetary, and everyone has consented to this arrangement, but that should be clear in your project as well. You can also show in-kind expenses. So those are estimated value of goods and services that were donated. Listing these helps to demonstrate the true cost of a project and shows the jury that even if you're receiving something for free, you are accounting for that in your overall project planning and your budget estimates. You also want to account for other forms of income that are anticipated or confirmed if the project requires more than what the Precipice Fund provides. And then you also want to make sure that your income matches your expenses. So show where the resources will come from or where they will likely come from. Again, talking about right-sizing your budget, so keeping in mind the values of community, collaboration, and mutual support, we ask that you consider how your proposed budget affects the larger application pool. If each applicant group budgets for what is truly needed, then we can ensure funds get distributed to more groups. So this right here is an example of the budget form that a group had filled out. So you can see that it includes their artist's fees here. They included a per diem. They had travel and housing costs, no ground transportation. So these are the artist expenses in this section here. And if you look over, this is where there's a note section where you can add in more details here. So looks like writers received 500 honorarium in each residency. They'll go on to explain more there. For their per diem, they write that writers receive $50 a day for food and materials. They talk about the flights and train cost for travel for 2 writers. So things to include and think about when you're creating your budget. There's also a production and public component area where you can talk about how much your materials and supplies are going to cost, if you have hired labor, if you need to buy equipment. And there's a section for a venue and rental fee. You also may want to think about documentation. So are you printing anything? Are you having a photographer or videographer for your event? And then going down a little bit farther, we're looking at marketing. So are you making postcards? Are you making posters? Are you doing anything on the web, media? All things to add into your expenses. So it looks like their total expenses came out to $5,000. That's what that they were asking for in their application from the Precipice Fund. And then it shows that the total income and expenses come out to 0 because their expenses are 5,000 and the fund is 5,000. I think we have one more example here. So this one shows their cash expenses, but also shows an in-kind expenses as well. So someone was providing donated time for the amount of 2,500 in their administrative fees here. They had 3 volunteers for that organization. They had a $100 donated in materials and supplies. $200 donated in food and drink. And again, you can see what their in-kind expenses were, what their cash expenses were. All of these totaled to $10,750. Their Precipice grant was, they were requesting $4,000. And then it shows more of their income here on the side and how all of that comes out to a total of $10,750. So equal, making that balance equal. Okay, we're going to talk about grantee responsibility here. If you are awarded funding, artists are responsible for prompt communication with me or Kristen. You're responsible for the financial accountability. Approximate what you're going to be spending in that proposed budget. We'll need you to submit your brief project summary by the end of the grant period. So that would be, if you're awarded, you have the year to do your project. I'll be reaching out with a request for your project summary, and that'll have questions, and that's something that'll come down the line. You're also responsible for some periodic project updates that you can send to me through the Precipice email. So that's if it's requested. And then, any tax liability that you incur from the grant income. So to mitigate this tax burden on any one applicant, Precipice Fund grant monies can be distributed among your collaborators. That's something that when we get into the contract phase of the award, I will be asking those questions and getting all the information from everyone. I think we're about to close on these dates here. So again, the application is open. It closes October 3rd. Mid to late November, applicants are notified of the panelists' decisions. We will be having a Precipice party where we announce the awardees, and everyone can come celebrate together. That's going to be on December 4th. Time is to be determined. And then in early 2026, grant recipients their funds are distributed to them. And then in December of 2026, all projects must be completed. And then here is where you can reach myself or Kristen. I respond to the Precipice email. It's precipice@pica.org. I'm going to pop these two websites in the chat for everyone, so you have a chance to click on them and they open up in your browser as well. But they're the PICA website for the Precipice Fund, and then also the Andy Warhol Foundation's Regranting program. So let me just exit out of this real quick and first show you where you can find the Precipice Fund on the PICA website, so pica.org. And then if you go scroll down on our menu here, you can find Precipice Fund, and this will take you to where the information for the application is. You can also click on applications and, oops. Sorry, I want to click on the submittable highlight where it says applications open via submittable. And this will take you to the submittable application that you can see here. And then I will add these into the chat. But Kristen, if you have any final thoughts, or if anyone has any final questions.
Questions or comments or anything churning about the project you're thinking about presenting that you want to ask a question about?
I think you answered pretty much all my questions.
Okay.
I think we fit we fit in sideways, but I think we fit in enough. So, I mean,
Yeah, I mean, it's always, I mean, I'm sure some of you probably have never applied for grants, some of you have, and it really is about the panel dynamic. And imagine it's like developing a cohort, even though the projects don't exist together in physical space, or aren't exactly related. The panel is kind of like looking at what they're going to fund as a total often, and seeing that there's like diversity in the projects in all ways, in form, in age, in geographic, racially, culturally, all of those things they're looking at across all of the projects. And so many excellent projects get funded, many excellent projects don't get funded. And every year I'm like, if we just had 100 more grand, we could send everyone home and fund everybody. Give everybody who applied the money, and that's what I wish I could do, and not judge like in between the lines of grants. But I will say the panelists are going to be very respectful of your project. And I did see, curious how many applications there were in the most recent round. Was it like 65, Elio?
Yeah. Usually I think we hit 60 at least.
So it's a high, I mean, we fund between like 10 and 15 projects, depending on what the amount of money is. We have the same amount of money to give every year, 60 grand. So it's not that much, but depending on how much artists ask for, that's why it fluctuates between 10, 12 grants to 15 grants. It's a rare year, 15. So yeah, that's your chances. You know, we don't expect there's going to be 200 grants this year, and there were 65 last year. It's somewhere between 65 and 90 a
those
year.
chances are pretty good. I mean, I write grants. That's what I do, actually. I work for a native nonprofit here in town, and I just got dropped in the deep end of grant writing some years ago, and now I'm a grant writer. So, yeah, and those.
Well,
And
everybody can write you and take down Tim's name, and you can all write him for questions. Yeah. Were there any other questions or comments, or anybody want to say something about their project?
I have a question about showing that the project is rooted in visual arts. You mentioned, I think it was called physical education.
Yes.
Did they show that the project was rooted in visual arts mainly from their backgrounds, or was it the project itself
It was a
that?
combination of both. So in their own artistic practice, although many of them, I think, identify mostly as dancers, their projects are really hybrid. And many of them do have a background in visual art or have like gotten MFAs. Not that that matters. You don't have to have any education, but it was an easy way for the panel to say like they understand what they're talking about when they're talking about performance. Also, their particular practices are more rooted in performance art, which comes out of a visual art trajectory, than performing arts, say theater or classical dance or other things like that. That is not to say that those forms can't make it through the process. Their first application was for very specifically workshops for visual artists. Like the title was like, we're performance artists who are making workshops for visual artists, teaching them about embodiment. And at that time, you know, a lot of visual artists were like adding performance into their projects or putting like multimedia stuff together. And so that was like a really compelling thing for the panel to apply for. Yeah, I sat on a panel recently in Hawaii, and a lot of projects there that come from more like traditional practices in dance and craft and canoe family journeys and other things were funded, right? Because of like the location and the area and the panelists giving us all information. So it really, you know, I think one thing is like using the vernacular of visual art, like trying to think about what that means. And there's a lot of ways to look at that. Again, you could look at other descriptions from past projects on our website or Warhol's website. Yeah. You can always ask Elio and I another question as you're getting ready to apply.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyone else? Okay, nice to see everybody. Thanks for taking your time to listen to that presentation. If you have any other questions, you can reach out to the Precipice email or to our individual emails. I think that Precipice and Elio are going to be faster than me. But you can reach out to me and I'll do my best to get back to you. If Elio ever has a question about something, they send it to me and we discuss how to respond. So we're in constant contact with each other. Really appreciate all of you and good luck with the applications and applying.
Thank you so
Also,
much.
also know that there's an Oregon Arts Commission deadline coming up on September 24th for career opportunity grants. That means if you have any exhibition opportunities outside of the state, you can apply. If you're doing a curatorial project outside of the state, you can apply. There's lots of other reasons, but that's something to check out too. Okay. See you, everybody.
Thanks
Thank you.
all.
Bye.
All right.